You are now watching Believe. Do you believe?
Very excited to have Steve Wyche of the NFL Network joining us now to break down the Falcons' kind of 2022 season, some oversight. So, Steve, let's just start right there. The quarterback position obviously is the notable change, but I kind of wanted to ask you, what about this team is different and maybe in a positive way from the 2021 season? Obviously, this is a transition team, but what has changed for the better in 2022?
Well, there's clearly a blueprint now. Okay, since they traded away Matt Ryan, it is a blueprint of we are going to build from the ground floor up. Right. So you have Marcus Mariota, who's going to be your starting quarterback, who's trying to resurrect his career. Desmond Ridder, a third-round draft pick quarterback, trying to start his career, and not Matt Ryan. So another thing than last year, which is very difficult for guys like Matt Ryan and guys on this team, is you had a new coaching staff. You had a new front office. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to build around a veteran QB who's been in for 13 years at the time. How is that going to work? Well, that question is no longer there. You've got a coaching staff and a front office that's been around for 2 years. They know what they want to do here. And that is clearly this year they want to enhance some of the skill positions and enhance their edge rushers, as we saw during the draft. Didn't spend any money really in free agency. So again, what's different being around this team is you feel now they understand their sense of purpose instead of wondering what that sense of purpose was, which I think was the case last year.
I think that's a good way to frame it, because it did always feel like, if you take over a restaurant or something and you're a new management company, you kind of see it, you come in, you want to see how everything runs for a month, 2 months or so and get a feel for how everything's operating and where you can clean some things up. And it did feel like the 2021 season was what do we have here to work with? What can stick, what can't, and what do we need to really change? It feels like this offseason there was a really concerted effort to elevate the floor of kind of this roster, to maybe bolster some of these positions where an injury or two last year just completely decimated kind of a whole group. Right. Where do you think those spots in particular were hit the most?
Well, I think where they added depth is significant. Clearly, is at linebacker, at edge. You saw it in the draft. Two edge guys in second and third round, two linebackers. I think both before the third round. Trey Anderson, and I may be wrong there, but they added depth there. They added athleticism there. The whole Deion Jones thing. He's starting the season on IR. If they get any calls to trade him, I think they're absolutely going to listen. But, I think they added some help in the secondary, getting Casey Hayward in free agency. Richie Grant looks like a different player in his second year at one of the safety spots. And look, you got an emerging talent in D. Alford. I mean, what a find this was. Guy's probably going to be the starting nickel, an undrafted guy who played in Canada, added about 15 pounds in the offseason, and was just fantastic in preseason. Now, how is that going to happen when he has to go up, against the Jarvis Landry in week one, or some guys like that, or Taysom Hill, in that role. So we'll see. But I think the one thing they've done is they developed some of the guys from last year, like Ode Ogundeji at one of the edge spots. They developed him. Okay, he's a solid first and second down edge guy. He can set the edge. He can do some things on the run. We'll bring in Arnold Ebiketie to rush the passer, the rookie. So, again, I think they've got a nice blend of young talent, enough veteran talent. You just have to wonder with the front end of that schedule, how guys are going to hold up when it gets to be stressful in those final 4 minutes of a game.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because, so much of a team's identity is really built in that first and a half month of the season where, the chemistry starts to come together, things like that. With it being so tough out of the gate for the Falcons, when does that message kind of start to falter? Does it start to falter? When do you make a change? And let's go right there to quarterback. Like Marcus Mariota, I don't think did anything to lose his job. If anything, I think he's cemented himself as the starter. But given the fact that Desmond Ridder had a great preseason, is kind of seemingly nipping at his heels a little bit based on his play. But I do think the coaching staff wants to pump the brakes a little bit on Desmond Ridder, give him some time to develop. What is your read on that whole situation? And is there a chance that we, see Desmond Ridder before the, certainly before the bye week in week 14, but before that kind of Thursday night game against Carolina, or everybody has that circled as kind of the date that they would expect to see Desmond Ridder? Is that still kind of in your mind the right date for him?
Well, I think it depends on how Marcus is playing, what the record is. I mean, if the
Mhm.
team has got 2 wins by then you're going to make a move and see if he can play. I mean, seriously, you're going to see if you can play, because if you got 2 wins by then you're probably looking at a top 5 or 6 pick, and
Right.
you just got to start to position yourself. But if Marcus comes out and plays well, then that's when the organization has to ask itself, okay, is this our long-term guy? And that's an interesting dilemma. It's an interesting dilemma. You got him for another year on that contract.
Hmm.
Is he a long-term guy? Do we want to lock him down now? Do we want to play out that second year and see what's going on? So that's, but it's also a comfortable dilemma, because if you get him for a second year, then you can fortify the rest of the roster around him, because if you do make a move with a quarterback at a second year, he'll be walking into a much better situation. At the same time, you want to find out if Desmond Ridder can play.
Right.
And so they'll have some questions to answer, but a lot of it just depends on the ebb and flow of the season, the success of the team, and how well Marcus is playing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important, to note that we're having this conversation in the shadow of the Jimmy Garoppolo kind of news cycle that's happened, and that, I think, would be the fear for some fans, where maybe Marcus Mariota has a good 2022 season, is a little better than expected, but then at what point is he what he has been? Does he revert back to that next year? I think that if you don't have a true blue quarterback, that's where fans are kind of like, well, what is necessarily the ceiling? I think Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot would say that it's about the entirety of the 53-man roster and not just the quarterback position. But this is the NFL, and we know how important that one spot can be.
Yeah, you got to get it. I mean, if you don't have a true blue quarterback, at some time you have to get one. That's why so many teams went bananas this year to
Yeah.
get quarterbacks. Even Cleveland, doing what it did to secure Deshaun Watson, who's not going to play for 11 games. So, again, that's a conundrum I'm sure they'll deal with when they have to. But as of right now, Marcus is the guy.
Yeah. And if they decide to go quarterback, they totally need to reset. First round pick seems likely if they have one of those high picks. Good quarterback class, it seems like right now. But let's talk about the last 2 first round picks for Atlanta. Kyle Pitts having a great training camp. Drake London had a good start to camp, and then obviously got kind of dinged up on that first play of the preseason game. But what did you see out of those 2 guys specifically, and how do you think that they're going to work in tandem here in Atlanta?
Yeah, I saw a lot. I mean, the one thing you hear people talk about with Pitts, and when you see him, is the route running now. Last year he was just learning an offense. He was learning the game. He was learning opposing personnel. They're not going to line him up in line and say, we need you to block 25 times a game like George Kittle. You're going to go out and you're going to be Darren Waller, right? And that was my comp on him. Waller's faster, but there's a guy who can get downfield. He can beat one-on-one coverages. He can make the 50-50 catches in double coverage. But that's where Drake London's also going to draw some stuff off him, because Drake London is as big as Calvin Johnson. He can run. But what surprised me about Drake, this is the basketball player. His feet, he's not like this big, tall, long strider. He's got those choppy feet where he can really hit a route. He was routing guys up all over the place in practice. So you add that plus the size, that means you got a ball control guy who can move the sticks, and you also have a guy who can hit the big play, as we saw on that catch against Detroit before he got hurt. Crossing route, caught it, good run after catch guy, and that's what this offense is, especially with Marcus. Marcus is going to play intermediate end. Desmond Ridder, he's going to take some shots downfield. But right now, they just don't have that other threat that's going to make defenses feel uneasy about getting beat downfield. So they're going to face a lot of coverage right now. A lot of too high safety is going to keep everything in front of them. Instead of facing like a lot of man-to-man and things like that to try to prevent some deep routes.
Do you think that
and you can win real quick, and you can win by paper cut in this league.
Yeah.
Right. You just got to have a running game to complement it, and that's the bigger issue with the Falcons.
Yeah, it's definitely the 2-faceted offense, right? To be able to kind of keep the defenses, to create that space where you can then paper cut them, but also have a quarterback that's patient and willing to do that. I think Marcus is certainly patient and willing to kind of take what the defense is giving him. And then if it's not there, we've seen he doesn't mind tucking it and running it. Do you think that we're overblowing kind of the added run element to this offense, or do you think it's going to be a legitimate factor that they're going to incorporate the quarterback run game specifically?
You have to incorporate it. You know, why waste it when you got a guy like Marcus? I mean, people don't realize how fast he is, right? He's a big dude who can run. So you move the pocket now, and in the run game, a moving pocket creates natural run lanes, whether for the quarterback, whether on the backside boot, or whether for the running back in this outside zone scheme. You have a mobile quarterback right? So now the backside edge guy has to wait and stay disciplined. So that can create a natural run lane for a running back to flow one way and cut back the other. And that's why I think Tyler Algier, the rookie running back, is eventually going to flourish. I mean, you got to have some type of passing game to get out of these 8-man boxes. But he is a one cut, downhill, loves contact. One thing about the outside zones game, there's going to be a safety or someone in the hole. You got to make a miss or you got to pound on them and break a tackle. And that's what Algier and that's what Damian Williams does very well. Cordell Patterson's going to be the guy to get some of the splash play type designs, but you can't have him carry the ball 175 times again. You saw he wore down last year, and that's where Damian Williams, a good veteran, is going to help. And I think Algier eventually is going to be someone who's really going to shine if this offensive line and the offense overall can at least not make them a one-dimensional team.
Are you optimistic that the offensive line can do that this year?
It depends, man. A lot of times we sit there and we look at guys individually and say, oh, they're a weak link in the offensive line. But with the scheme, you can hide that. I mean, I remember back in the days of Michael Vick, they ran a very similar blocking scheme. The old Alex Gibbs blocking scheme. They led the NFL in rushing for 2 years. Now they were last in passing, but for 2 years by having an all-pro offensive lineman or Pro Bowl offensive lineman. So as long as they work on a thread, there are things they can do. I mean, you've got to have the passing threat to back defenses off a little bit. But Marcus been able to run it outside, either on the boot or on just a straight moving pocket. That's going to create some natural run lanes. You just have to hope some of these guys can stick on their blocks long enough for the running back to make a move. I mean, the one thing they also did is they upgraded speed at running back. That's what they had to do. You cannot have 3 yards in a cloud of AstroTurf run game anymore. So getting that speed where you can have somebody who can turn a 4-yarder into a 15-yarder is vital, and they've done that.
Yeah, I do think I'm a big fan of the Damian Williams acquisition. I think he's going to be kind of sneaky important to this offense at times this year. But I'm a big believer in what Tyler Algier can bring as well. Let's flip quickly over to the defensive side of the ball. We touched a little bit on some of the pass rushers, some of the the linebacker changes, things like that. But this rookie class, Troy Anderson, Arnold Ebiketie, what are the expectations for how soon they'll be incorporated into the defense? Do you think it's going to be right from the jump that they have some bigger roles, or do you think like last year, the Falcons maybe pick and choose which rookies to put more on their plate?
Well, they're going to pick and choose. I mean, they're pretty set at inside linebacker with Walker, and I'm blanking on the
Rashaan Evans.
Rashaan Evans, right? He's a big. They're both hammer guys, right? They want DNPs, want those inside guys to come downhill. Trey Anderson can do that, and eventually he's going to get into the lineup. We don't know when. In terms of Ebiketie, it won't be long. He's real. I mean, we saw that. We saw that in preseason. We saw it in practices. I mean, when he puts hands on, you guys feel it. Has natural pass rushing instincts. I mean, he is a player. So he's going to be in that lineup pretty quickly. Malone, I think, would be a little bit more of a spot guy here and there. I mean, the one thing we did see out of him is he can drop in coverage and do some things as well. So he's not just going to be a designated rusher like Ebiketie will be. So, I mean, I think those are some of the particulars you're looking for out of those guys right away. And again, D. Alford being the undrafted guy coming from Canada, making his mark. He's another guy who's going to play right away and do some things.
Do you have him kind of slotted in there at nickel right now, especially with Isaiah Oliver starting on IR, Mike Ford kind of being, so you've got D. Alford.
No, he beat him out. Alford, they love him. They love him. And here's an interesting note. I was talking to DNPs about this before the Jags preseason game. I said, do you think because he played in Canada where you have all that space on the field, he's kind of a perfect fit? Like it's helped him with the geometry of today's game because, it's all 4 wide, 3 wide. And he said, absolutely. He said he sees the field a little bit differently. He's a very good open field tackler, and he can cover. The big thing with him was in the winter he was 165 pounds. Now he's playing closer to 180. And it's it's not a pumped up 180. It's like a legit hit his grown man strength, as they say. So the fact that he's added that size really makes them feel comfortable about playing him. Now, again, we just have to see what he does when he's matched up against a Jarvis Landry or Taysom Hill or one of these guys in week 1.
Right. Yeah, it's a good story up throughout camp, preseason, but then when it matters on Sunday, that's when it really does. Sticking, with the secondary, because I think D'Alford is a great example of exactly what fans wanted Terry Fontenot to bring to Atlanta that he did so well in New Orleans, which was kind of find some guys out there who were maybe already in the league for a few years or playing elsewhere and kind of bring them in and maybe get some of these players who other teams had passed over for one reason or another, and then they turn into productive guys here in Atlanta. We're seeing some signs of that already with, I think Anthony Rush was a great example of that last year, kind of midseason, bringing him in, like just getting these types of guys. Casey Hayward, I think, is my signing of the offseason for Atlanta. I made a couple of more mistakes, I think, in camp and in preseason games than I was expecting, but nothing egregious. What should our expectations be for a Casey Hayward who's entering his 11th season? His best ball is probably behind him, but how much does he have left in the tank here for Atlanta?
Well, look, people thought he was done when he was with the Chargers, and he goes to Raiders, and the Raiders and resurrection in that scheme. And so, we'll see. I mean, I think he was going through some learning curve in training camp. He's got to overcome that. But look, Casey knows opposing personnel. He knows tendencies. He knows how to play in the big game. Good Lord, he's played enough of them, right? So he will play to his strengths. Even if he's lost a step, he will play to his strengths. They're not going to expose him, especially when you've got an AJ Terrell on the other side who can do everything. And the physicality he plays with, my God, I mean, he's boy. My comps with him and Jalen Ramsey. I mean,
AJ?
AJ is good. But so, Hayward, look, and Hayward's going to be a good teacher. Like, he's going to help some of these young guys with coverages. When they're calling things out, he's going to help them recognize things as to where that communication is so vital. Like, he's going to help a D'Alford. So, I mean, Hayward's going to be someone who's going to get teams to throw the ball a little bit more at AJ. And he's just not going to be a liability. That's the main thing. As of right now, he does not look like he's done, and he's got plenty left.
Yeah, I really think that just kind of solidifying and with the safety position as well, Richie Grant, Jalen Hawkins, if they can take a step forward, if this team can at least start to build some kind of identity on the defensive side of the ball as they wait for everything to flesh out, I really think that's going to help them be more balanced, win some of these closer games, avoid being blown out by the good teams like they were last year, which is all steps in the right direction. I've got two more for you, Steve, before I let you go. Looking ahead to next Sunday, of course, New Orleans Saints, week 1, hate week. How does this team match up against a Saints team that also feels like it could be in transition on the one side of the coin, but also is not? There's a lot of familiar faces. They've got stability at some positions. It seems like it'll be a good test for both clubs. Who do you like in this one?
Well, look, Atlanta's going to ride the momentum they felt coming out of the preseason. They feel really good about themselves, as they should. I mean, they put some things together. Look, talent-wise, I'm around a lot of camps. They're just not where some other rosters are, right? They don't have the Niners roster. They don't have the Browns roster. But they've got something to them. They've got a feeling to them. So that's why this game, I think it needs to be a little shock and awe. Okay. If they try to settle in and go back and forth with the Saints, that Saints defense at some point is going to catch them. I mean, they're just too strong up front. You got guys like Demario Davis, who's a stud. Their secondary is legit. They'll eventually catch up to them. So I think early on, Atlanta's got to come out and play well, hit some plays to get the Saints thinking a little bit. And defensively, they've got to figure out if Jameis is going to be Jameis. It looks like Kamara's going to be playing for the Saints. So the Saints are a different offense when he plays. And so he's going to stress them a little bit. That's where a guy like D'Alford, they're going to try to match him up on D'Alford. They're going to try and match him up, on a Michael Walker and see how they hold up, but they've got to also get some rush. And we know that left tackle situation is a little faulty. So they've got to try to take advantage of that. But the main thing they've got to do to me is they got to put some points up early. And if they can hit a couple explosive plays, we'll see. But if the game kind of settles in, I think that Saints defense is eventually just – that's a monster, man. They've been top 5 or 6 for like 3 or 4 years in a row, and they will start to make their presence felt as the game wears on.
Yeah, I really like the moves that they made in their secondary. I think it's going to be one of the better units in the league this year.
Well, we'll see with Marcus May. We'll see how that situation plays out. But yeah, I mean,
but yeah, I mean,
and Honey Badger and those guys, they got some players now.
Tyrann Mathieu, man. I remember watching the 2011 SEC championship game where he had that punt return against Georgia. I was like in the building for that and totally took the wind out of our sails as Bulldogs fans. But first play of the game, flea flicker to Jared Bernhardt. That's what Steve Wyche wants to see for a 65-yard touchdown.
little lacrosse action. There we go.
Heck yeah. All right, last one, just big picture, 2022, your belief, maybe post-draft, kind of your vision for what the Falcons could accomplish in 2022 compared to now. Has it changed at all? Have you become any more optimistic, any more pessimistic, anything like that? Where are your feelings for this season?
Well, I think once they got through the whole Deshaun Watson flirtation, which really kind of rankled the underbelly of what they were doing, and they opted to trade Matt Ryan, then they had a sense of, here's what we're going to be it good, bad, or indifferent. They at least were able to establish identity, like we no longer have to try to build a playoff caliber team because of Matt. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to all grow together. Okay, and that's nothing against Matt. I mean, he was just a guy who was 14 years in,
right?
And everybody else is young. I saw it happen when I covered the Dolphins with Dan Marino. It was a very peculiar deal at the end of his career. So their schedule is what frightens me. You know, I think they're gonna be the type of team where after every game, the opposing team is going to be like, man, they're going to be good next year, right? They're going to be like,
yeah,
we beat them, but they got something going here.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of like what some teams are saying at the end of the season about the Lions last year. The Falcons are going to win more than 3 games like the Lions, but when teams play the Lions at the end of last year, they're kind of like, uh-oh. All right, they're on the come.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think the Falcons can be better than what people are projecting. They've got to steal a couple games early because, I mean, they're going to get to a point. Look at the defensive fronts that they play the first 7 games. It is a frightening task. For that offense. So their defense is going to have to get takeaways. Here's what I'll say. Their team will be a lot better than what people think if their defense gets takeaways. If they get at least 10 to 12 more sacks. Last year 18, that's come on. That's criminal to have an 18 sacks. So, record-wise, if they win as many as they did last year, I mean, I know it'll be disappointing in the building, but I think that's looking at that schedule. I think that's something to say, okay, all right, we're different. We're a different type of team, but that's something to build on, but it's going to be tough. I don't see them as a playoff team. I'll put it as that, but I think they're going to be a team where, it was kind of like that Serena Williams match, in the U.S. Open where at the end, everybody was tired. Both players, all the fans, like that's what competition looks like. And I think almost every game they play is going to feel like that.
I think that's incredibly well said. I think that is very inspiring. I think if you're Falcons fans, like that's all right, cool. Let's be that team where you finish playing and it's knockdown, drag out, and the other team is just like, yeah, we beat them, but like we don't want to see them again next year, right?
Right.
I think that's a great goal for 2022. Steve, thank you so much for taking some time and hopping on and breaking down the Falcons. Everybody, please, of course, everybody probably already follows the great Steve Wyche on Twitter, but it's at Wyche 89 if you do not. Steve, anything that you want to plug before I let you go?
No, Will, just want to wish you the best and all your listeners and fans the best. Everything else, just watch NFL Network whenever you can.
You heard him. Turn it on. Appreciate it, Steve. Thank you so much.
You got it, Will.